My name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Podcast, episode number 54. With our book today, our play today, probably one of the top 5 most famous pieces of literature, English literature, ever written in the Western world, The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, by William Shakespeare. This is our kickoff to a month-long joust, or shall I say jaunt, through the realm of Shakespeare, through the world of Shakespeare, through the world of the writings of William Shakespeare. We'll be covering Macbeth, or not Macbeth, I'm sorry. No, we'll be doing Macbeth a little bit later on down the pike. We'll be doing Taming of the Shrew. We'll be doing Othello. And we will be doing my personal favorite Shakespeare play, King Lear. This is actually follow-up to Julius Caesar, so you should go back and listen to that episode last year if you'd like to hear some really trenchant analysis on how Shakespeare talked about power and the lessons that can be learned about power from reading Julius Caesar, particularly the first couple of acts. As usual, Hamlet is built on a 5-act structure, and today we will be focusing, for the most part, on the first couple of acts that are the setup for other things. We'll also be talking about other events that occur later on in the play. We'll also be talking about the impact of Hamlet on a larger cultural stage, and of course, the ways in which we mostly interact with Shakespeare in our time, which is typically not in a stage play. For the vast majority of us, if we interact with Shakespeare at all, it is going to be through film. And of course, Tom is a great lover of film, as am I. I recently watched this weekend the 1996 version of The Tragedy of Hamlet, starring Kenneth Branagh, which was also directed by Kenneth Branagh. And he played the titular character, Hamlet. I'll be starting today from scene 2, act 1. Enter Claudius, king of Denmark, Gertrude the queen, counselors, Polonius and his son Laertes, Hamlet, and including Voltimand and Cornelius. And by the way, the version of Hamlet that I will be reading from for the podcast, we'll be reading from a couple of different versions, is the Puffin Books version, an imprint of Penguin Group, published in, let's see here, 2011 for the Puffin Young Readers Group. So this is a version of Shakespeare, a version of Hamlet that is really targeted towards the modern reader, right? But we'll also be pulling information from the Folger annotated version of Shakespeare, which for my money is great because it not only has all the annotation, has many of the original terms and words that have been taken out of Shakespeare to make it easier to read have been put back in. It also has some very interesting information in it at the front, including a summary of Hamlet that makes it a lot easier to kind of get through, because we're actually able to understand as readers what the actual text is doing. And that textual introduction is by Barbara Mowat and Paul Werstein. I would encourage you to check out the Folger Shakespeare versions. They have the Taming of the Shrew, they have Othello. And these are really, really good if you need a grounding in Hamlet. And we'll get a grounding today when we talk about the literary life of William Shakespeare. All right, back to Hamlet, scene 2, the castle. By the way, we're going to read this with a flourish today on the podcast. The King of Denmark. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, and that it is us befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Therefore our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress through this warlike state, have we, as 'twere with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and a drooping eye, with mirth in funeral, and with dearth in marriage, in equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. Nor have we herein barred your better wisdoms, which have freely gone with this fair along. For all our thanks now follows that you know that young Fortinbras, holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death our state to be in disjoint and out of frame, colleagued with this dream of his advantage, he hath not failed to pester us with his message, importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father, with all bands of law, to our most valiant brother. So much for him. Now for ourself and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is. We have here writ to Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras, who, impotent and bedrid, scarcely hears of his nephew's purpose to suppress his further gain herein, that the levies, the lists, and full proportions are all made out of his subject. And we here dispatch you, good Cornelius, and you, Voltimand, for bearers of this greeting to old Norway, giving to you no further personal power to business with the king more than the scope of these delated articles allow. Farewell, and let your haste commend your duty. Cornelius and Voltimand. In that and all things we shall show our duty. The king. No doubt, we doubt it nothing. Heartily farewell. Exit Voltimand and Cornelius. And now, Laertes, what's the news with you? You told us of some suit. What is it, Laertes? You cannot speak of reason to the Dane and lose your voice. What wilt thou now beg, Laertes? That shalt now be my offer, not thy asking. The head is not more native to the heart, the hand more instrumental to the mouth, than is the throne of Denmark to thy father. What wouldst thou have, Laertes? Laertes, my dread lord, your leave and favor to return to France, from whence, though willingly I came to Denmark to show my duty in your coronation, yet now I must confess that duty done, my thoughts and wishes bend again toward France, and bow them to your gracious leave and pardon. The king. Have you your father's leave? What says Polonius? Polonius. He hath, my lord, wrung from me my slow leave by laborsome petition, and at last upon his will I sealed my hard consent. I do beseech you, give him leave to go. The king. Take thy fair hour, Laertes, time be thine, and thy best graces spend it at thy will. But now, my cousin Hamlet and my son. By the way, Hamlet then speaks aside for his first words in the play, in this act, a very famous line, a little more kin and less than kind. The events of Hamlet set the stage for tragedy, and the events before Hamlet set the stage for tragedy. Written roughly 400 years ago, and if you go and read the Wikipedia article, cobbled together from a collection of other stories, Hamlet is the story of the Prince of Denmark. And Denmark sits in an interesting spot in Northern Europe during the early to the mid part of the 17th century when Shakespeare was writing. There were many wars going on. There had been the explosion of the Protestant Reformation, beginning with Martin Luther in the 15th century, and this had caused a tidal wave of problems in Europe. A tidal wave of people moving, a tidal wave of people engaged in warfare. You had the English, you had the Spanish, you had the French seeking to maintain dominion on the continent. You had minor entities like the Norwegians and the Danes seeking to fight each other. And of course, not unique to our time, the looming power of Russia, and of course, the disunited Germany, always in the background. This was a time of great struggle, and Shakespeare was writing this story, this powerful tale of revenge, with a backdrop, the context of this great struggle behind him. There are many drivers in this play, and Hamlet is one of the most notorious plays that Shakespeare ever wrote. Other than Macbeth, it's his most well-known. And yet there are things that people miss about Hamlet. We understand, well, I shouldn't say we understand. There's an old joke that Isaac Asimov used to tell where a woman walked up to him and said, back in the 1960s, I don't know what all this talk is about Hamlet. It's just a bunch of quotations linked together. That's how powerful this play is. That's how deeply it has embedded itself in the Western consciousness. I'm going to say quotes today that you are going to recognize. To thine own self be true. More than kin and less than kind. I'm going to say other quotes, and you're going to recognize them, but they've been decontextualized from Hamlet. They now have gone on to serve other means. I think Shakespeare would approve. For leaders, there's a lot to learn from Hamlet. And just in that beginning setup there, how does a king conduct himself in the court after he has potentially usurped the throne and taken on the wife of the man he may have murdered? This is great power politics, kids. And great power politics occurs not just between great powers and not just between great corporations or great states, but it also takes place between great families and in great communities. Power is the one thing that we have not really talked about too deeply on this podcast because it's the one thing that everybody knows about, but that no one can define, kind of like air. And power runs through Hamlet, well, like a lightning bolt through a storm-clouded sky. Of course, we have Tom Libby on today to talk about this. The last time he read Hamlet was when he was in high school.
I had more hair then.
We all had more hair then. And so he's going to shake off the dust of some of that high school knowledge, some of that high school remembrance. And he's going to talk with us about the impact of Hamlet on leaders, what leaders can take from this play. And we're going to dip in. As I said, much of the information in Hamlet is front-loaded here in the first three acts. Much of the good stuff is front-loaded in the first three acts before Hamlet descends into frailty, deception, and madness. And we're not going to trace all of that today because we would have a 5-hour-long podcast. Instead, we're going to just touch on the beginning pieces. So, Tom, remembering back to Hamlet in high school, right? And thinking about your own life and thinking about also the many different versions of Hamlet that there are floating around. There's a lot of different things to pull from. Let's start with something basic. What do you think William Shakespeare was chasing here with Hamlet? What did he want to tell people? Because we've had tragedy ever since the Greeks figured out that was one of the three main types of stories, right? Tragedy, comedy, and then of course there's the love story, right? There's the romance, right? And by the way, Shakespeare, of course, covered all three of these, right? You know, comedy with the Taming of the Shrew.
Sometimes he covered all three in one play.
Exactly, right. You know, I'm trying to keep it simple for folks. You know, romance in Midsummer Night's Dream, and of course, you know, straight tragedy in plays like Hamlet and Macbeth and King Lear and Othello. And by the way, that's reflected in the full title of Hamlet, which is The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. So, what was Shakespeare? What do you think Shakespeare was trying to chase here for those of us listening to the podcast today?
No, I think part of it at its most fundamental core was a lesson in self-preservation.
Okay.
If you think about the queen, I mean, the main character, obviously Hamlet, and by self, I think he has his own version of self-preservation when he starts talking to the ghost, his father's ghost and stuff like that. Like, and he's going down this rabbit hole of what we would today consider probably mental illness, whereas back in the day, I'm not 100% convinced they understood what mental illness even was. And,
Right.
And that might have been like the idea of, oh my God, maybe he really does talk to the spirits or whatever, right? Like he's really seeing, he's really seeing his father's ghost or whatnot. And today we would have been like, oh, let's put him on some dirazepam or something
Let's dope that kid up because we can't have him talking. Yeah, you're right.
Right. So but in the same sense, regardless of that, I think there are lots of ways that you can look at Hamlet and say, when you are faced with some semblance of, yeah, I mean, again, to your point, whether it's tragedy or some sort of life-altering event, that self-preservation is going to take precedence in you, which is where you can think of, and the dynamics of power matter in that case, right? So one thing I always thought, and I'll ask you the question, because I've never really been able to ask anybody else this, but I always thought it was interesting that Shakespeare, writing as an English person, writing about the Danish throne, like, did they not have the same sequence of hierarchy? Like, meaning, when his father died, wouldn't he just become king? Like, I didn't understand that part of it. But again, I was thinking about this in the sense of corporate, like corporate structure, right? When there's like some sort of hostile takeover, and you're like maintaining some of the higher leadership, and their version of self-preservation comes in when some new leadership takes over with power. Like, there's some structural dynamics there that kind of can translate into the corporate world. But I never understood why an English person was writing about the Danish throne, especially back then, where it's not like they had, the BBC online. They couldn't possibly know what was going on that quickly. So,
Well, I think so. I think there's a couple of different things. That's a great question. I think there's a couple of different things here. So Hamlet has influenced think about modern television shows. Okay.
Sure.
So Sons of Anarchy is basically Hamlet.
Yeah.
With motorcycle gangs, by the way. Like, the guy's father dies. The mom, who was the wife unmarried with children, I can't remember her name
Katie
now.
Seagal.
Katie Seagal, thank you. Yes, Katie Seagal is running around in biker outfit, and she's got the queen role. And then you've got the new head of the biker gang, and you've got, the kid coming along whose father died under mysterious circumstances. That's Hamlet. That's the whole setup right there.
Yeah.
The show Succession.
Succession was the one that would popped into my brain about the corporate takeover. Yeah. So
right.
Yeah.
That's just Hamlet, but the father's not dead yet.
Right. But it's almost like the father's already a ghost to them, though, if you think about it from that perspective. Like, yeah, I get it. But
exactly. Yeah. Now, as far as the story of Hamlet and great power politics in Europe in the 17th century, the answer to your question, and I think this is the genuine answer, the answer to your question is the speed of communication from their perspective was fast.
True.
So the printing press in the late 15th century, the printing press, I mean, Gutenberg was running around disassembling that thing and putting it back together, trying to prevent people from copying his work between like 1465, 1475 to the end of the century, right? Martin Luther comes along at the beginning of the 1500s. I mean, nails his 95 Theses in 1500 to the door of the Wittenberg Church. People get a hold of that. They use the printing press to print that out, and it spreads like wildfire across Europe. So I think we have to contextualize your question in the context of, for their time, the printing press was the internet.
Yeah, true.
Okay. Shakespeare would have had access to all of that information. Plus, he would have had access to all of the old Greek and Roman history. So Sophocles, Aristophanes as plays that were being copied and recopied, that had been copied and recopied, and now were being on the printing press and spreading around all over like wildfire, right? And by the way, wildfire for them meant, instead of getting information in a month and a half, you got information in a week.
Yeah, right.
I know for us that seems like, what, a week? But like, that you go from a month and a half to a week, please. We'll take it. Where do I sign up? There's no friction there, right? Because you can make faster decisions. They would be, and I hold to this always, they would be stunned by the speed with which we get information.
For sure.
Oh my God, they'd be blown away. Shakespeare couldn't work now. He'd be on Twitter all the time. Couldn't get any work done. But it'd
be a collection of quotes.
Yeah. A long string of tweets. Be scratching his head trying to figure out how do I turn this into something? It's gotta be something. Is there anything here? Is this anything? So in answer to your question, Shakespeare would have known about Danish great power politics from his perspective, literally instantly. Now, at that time, that's the time, if I remember correctly, of Elizabeth the First. Or Elizabeth the First, yes, Elizabeth the First. So she was running around dealing with the Scots. So she was dealing with Scotland and William of Orange, and of course, the perennial enemy, the French. For them, from their perspective in England, anything going on in Denmark was subordinate to anything going on with France.
Sure.
And so I get the sense, and this is my best guess answer. And of course, if you have a better answer, you can email me on the podcast and give us a better answer. But my best guess sense with what I know of the history there and how things click together with the information and the other things, my best guess and answer to your question is he wrote it to keep himself out of trouble. Just like most creatives do. He wrote it to keep himself out of trouble, because if he had written about what was going on in the great power politics of England, that would have been too close to the bone.
Yeah, he'd have been beheaded.
And something, right, exactly. Like, forget it. Like, his head would be on a pike. And so you could either have your head on a stick or you can keep tweeting.
Right. I got you.
So, and I think that's, for me anyway, that's the easiest answer. Now, there may be more complicated things. If you go and look at the Wikipedia article on Hamlet, there's a lot of good analysis there. I've skimmed through a little bit of that. And that's probably the closest encyclopedic analysis of Hamlet. But I'm thinking about how creatives create and human nature, right? And how they deal with leadership and power. So there's that. The other thing is, if you're in a great power environment, and this is my thought, if you're a leader in a great power environment, you don't want too many people on the edges popping off about what you're doing. You want to keep as much of that information on the down low as possible. You want to make it look like we're big, we're strong, we're bad. Leave us alone. But internally you can be a mess.
Yeah.
Internally, you can have some mess. And you see this in the court of the king. This is why I started off with the king. So he ascends to the uncle, ascends to the throne, but it's already a mess. It's a mess even before he shows up, because you've got the king of Norway who has no control over his nephew. And his nephew just killed, the Danish king, right? So you've got that deceit already starting to sort of flow through the power politics of the system. And then you've got the dynamic of Hamlet and his buddies, Horatio and oh gosh, the other guy's name, I can't remember his name right now, but you got him sort of, bringing that dynamic along. And of course, Hamlet's being driven by personal revenge, which is a question I would want to ask you. So, should a leader be driven by personal revenge? And I'm not saying is it right or wrong. I'm saying, should that be a motivator?
I mean, I don't, whether it should or shouldn't be, I'm not sure the real answer to that, but it can be, like whether it is or whether it should or shouldn't be, it is probably not I don't know. I mean, because sometimes you get you could potentially, if the revenge is against, we'll just keep it in the literary sense, right?
Yeah.
If the personal vendetta is against evil and the outcome ends up being good triumphs over evil, then what's so wrong with it, right? Like, who cares? But if it's the vice versa, I mean, are we talking about Star Wars here? No.
Another tragedy.
Another tragedy, right? But in seriousness, and again, I'll try to bring it back to some sort of corporate environment where, maybe you have a son or a daughter that thinks the dad should retire, and they figure out a way to, that they, take over that company, and then you have a sibling that just trying to look out for the dad, and they kind of have this personal vendetta against the siblings now because they just made dad retire. I don't know. Is there justification there? I don't know how old the guy is. So, I mean, maybe we should have maybe we should have killed him in Act 3 instead of.
Well, okay. So this gets to something else. This is another Pandora's box, right? So every time yes, you make one point, then we're gonna open up another door here, and this is the door. Succession is hard. And the thing that makes it hard is people don't want to give up power.
Absolutely.
I think of the William Shatner song that he recorded on the album Has Been. By the way, one of the greatest spoken word albums in the history of spoken word albums. Go check it out. It's on Amazon, Audible Music. You can go get it. I'm a big fan of William Shatner spoken word albums. Big fan. And I'll leave it at that. But one of the better songs that he records on there is this song called You'll Have Time. And one of the lines in the song is, you're going to die. Everybody is going to die. Matter of fact, by the time you hear this song, I might be dead. Hopes, singers, average people, or how Fight Club put it back in the day, on a long enough timeline, everybody's survival drops to 0. But people don't think they're going to die all the way up to the end. They're going to be like, really? I got to go?
And as a species, we're infatuated with immortality. That's why we keep coming up with vampires and all these, whatever. Like we always find a way to make us live forever for some reason. We're infatuated with it. But
or Project Calico over there with Google, like they're coming up doing nonsense with transhumanism and all that kind of stuff. Like they're trying to make that thing real.
Yeah, right. I don't know. But back to your point though, with the whole power and succession and like, so I always found it fascinating that like, especially in the in the royalty part of it, that you quote unquote name a successor.
Mm-hmm.
That like almost at birth, right? Like, so you have this kid's born, you're like, oh, that's going to be my successor. And then you have 3 more kids and you're like, oh, God dang it. So-and-so would have been a better leader. Like, but I already named a successor, so I can't do anything about it. Like, I don't just, that never really settled well in my brain. Like,
well, that's because fundamentally as a person with an American mindset, that drives us crazy. But there's another tension in there, right? So the tension is between picking someone who might or might not be qualified, and you have no idea because they're full of promise. Like when you're 6, you have promise. That's all you've got. You just got sheaves of promise ahead of you like wheat.
Right.
Less so when you're 35. You got less promise ahead of you when you're 35.
Especially if you're 35, still living in your parents' basement.
Right. Exactly. The decay rate starts to kick in at a certain point. It used to be in our culture, the decay rate kicked in right around 18. Now it kicks in right around 35. I mean, if you're a 40-year-old person, man or woman, you're that last weirdo at the end of the party, like that no one wants to talk to. Okay. That's one tension. The other tension is the idea that we want to pick the person that has the most merit and the most competency. I just did a shorts episode about this. Short number 73. You can go back and listen to it, or you can go and listen to it if you want, if you're listening. But that idea of being competent, and I'm not talking about merit, although we link merit and competency together. That idea that someone would be good at the basics of something, which, and you're talking about royalty or being in a corporation, that's the basics of management. That's the basics of leadership. And that they're somehow going to just sort of get this competency through osmosis is what has driven much of American business culture for the last, my God, 120 years probably. Like Henry Ford thought his son was going to be perfectly competent and be a carbon copy of him, and his son had zero interest in being any of that.
True. I just, specifically to me, so I recently just had a conversation about this, and I don't understand why people do this, why companies do this, but for me personally, like in sales, right? Mm-hmm. You'll take that number 1 salesperson and you'll promote them to a sales manager or some sort of sales leadership role because they're the best at and then they fail, and they
Yes.
don't understand why they fail.
Right.
And like, because you never looked at the other stuff. Like, you just look at
Right.
the fact, yes, they can sell your product or service or whatever, and they might be the best at it, but can they teach other people how to do it? Can they, are there other factors that you're not looking at, like design and implementation of strategy? Like, can you look, like, if they're not doing that, like, then what makes you think they can run a sales team? And oftentimes, and you know, again, not to talk about personal accomplishment, whatever, but, and I know we do that a little bit here, but I was a regional VP of sales for a company that I had something like, I think 60 or 70 people underneath me, and they were all some management levels. And so there was 2 different management levels before they got to me. And I oftentimes found myself promoting the number 2 or number 3 guy or girl into that next manager role, because yes, they were able to maintain their quota, but they exhibited so much other traits, like, that were leadership traits. And I was always questioned until a year after they were promoted and they're wildly successful. And then I was like, oh, though, you might know what you're doing.
Well, it's because we don't have a good, oh my God, like, this is great to talk about. And then we'll go back to Hamlet here in a minute. But this is a great point that I think bears fleshing out a little bit. The things that, no, not even that. Systems, right, demand a certain level of competency. So for instance, if I am building a bridge, I want you to be really good at math, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of your national origin. I don't care who you worship. I don't care who you marry and make an intimate life with. I don't care about any of that. I care that you are good at math.
Yeah.
I care that you know that 2 things plus 2 things equals 4 things. All of the time, no matter where we are, ad infinitum, mazel tov into your health. Right? Like, that's all I care about. I don't care about anything else.
Right.
Once we get past that, though, this is the problem. Once we get past judging being good on that, we have very few metrics for success for all of that other stuff. And this is why when I do trainings on emotional intelligence, I spend 2 of the first 6 hours just convincing people that emotional intelligence actually exists.
Yeah, right.
You know, because people are so, because of the Industrial Revolution system that we built, even though we're in the backwash of it, there's still enough people around who remember that all you had to do to be competent was be good at the core things. And that other stuff, while nice, wasn't interesting. Well, unfortunately, we've reached a spot where, due to the successes of industrialization, I've been saying this for years, the successes of industrialization, we are now at a spot where it's that core thing that you had to be good at, that 2 + 2 = 4, can be done faster or better by other people, other places, or it can be done by a large language model or an algorithm somewhere. Goodbye, it's gone. And so the core has come out of the apple. And now people are looking at that, at the rest of the apple, going, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's that's a problem. And the people who know what to do with the rest of the apple, those people will succeed. And everybody else who's flummoxed or befuddled by it, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to get universal basic income, because you're not going to know what to do.
Yeah.
Tragically. And by the way, there's so many apples, by the way, to push the analogy just a little bit further, there's so many apples where the core is just being taken out. So it's not just building a bridge, right? It's sales, it's marketing, it's the kind of stuff I do with content creation. Like, I'm seeing all this stuff happen with AI and content creation, AI driven podcasts, AI driven videos, AI this, AI driven marketing, all of this stuff, right? And at the end of the day, that's just hollowing out the core thing from marketing, or hollowing out the core thing from creating content, or hollowing out the core thing from creating a podcast. But if I could do the best thing that I could do with the rest of that apple, then I don't care. Go ahead, hollow out all day. Yeah. There's no fear there.
Right.
But for the people who really need that core to exist, like you were talking about, if they don't meet their sales quota, that's the core of the apple, and all of a sudden that goes away. People don't know what to do.
I agree. I agree with that for sure.
So, and the person who judges that and has a good sense of that will succeed as a leader and will succeed even as an advisor to leaders, which Hamlet would have done well to have an advisor.
Yeah.
Particularly when he ran into this fellow. So, returning to Hamlet, speaking of Hamlet's mental illness, returning to Hamlet, still in Act 1, Scene 5, enter Ghost and Hamlet at the battlements. That's where this conversation, this interaction is going to happen. Hamlet, whither wilt thou lead me? Speak, I'll go no further. Ghost, mark me. Hamlet, I will. Ghost, my hour is almost come when I to sulphurous and tormenting flames must render up myself. By the way, there's a concept of heaven and hell there. Hamlet, alas, poor Ghost. Ghost, pity me not, but lend thy serious hearing to what I shall unfold. Hamlet, speak, I am bound to hear. Ghost, so art thou to revenge when thou shalt hear. By the way, that's the swearing, that's the binding together. People really believed in that stuff back in the day.
Oh,
anyway,
yes.
Back to Hamlet. What? Ghost. Now here we go. Here's the motivating moment in the play. I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast and fires till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house, I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood, make thy two eyes like stars start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand and end like quills upon the fearful porpentine. But this eternal blazon must not be to ears of flesh and blood. List, list, oh list, if thou didst ever thy dear father love. Hamlet, oh God. Ghost, revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. Hamlet, murder? Ghost, murder most foul, as in the best it is, but this most foul, strange and unnatural. Hamlet, haste me to note that I, with wings as swift as meditation or the thoughts of love, may sweep to my revenge. Ghost, I find thee apt, and duller shouldst thou be than the fat weed that roots itself in ease on Lethe wharf. Wouldst thou now not stirrest this? Now, Hamlet, here, 'tis given out that, sleeping in my orchard, a serpent stung me. So the whole ear of Denmark is by a forged process of my death rankly abused. But know, thou noble youth, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown. Hamlet, oh, my prophetic soul, my uncle? Ghost, that incestuous, that adulterate beast, with witchcraft of his wits, with traitorous gifts, or wicked wit and gifts that have the power so to seduce, one to his shameful lust, the will of my most seeming virtuous queen. O Hamlet, what a falling off was there from me, whose love was that of dignity, that it went hand in hand, even with the vow I made to her in marriage, and to decline upon a wretch whose natural gifts were poor to those of mine. But virtue, as it never will be moved through, though lewdness court it in a shape of heaven, so lust, though to a radiant angel linked, will satiate itself in a celestial bed and prey on garbage. But soft, methinks, I scent the morning air. Brief let me be. Sleeping within my orchard, my custom always of the afternoon, upon my secure hour thy uncle stole, with juice of cursed Hobana in a vial, and in the porches of my ears did pour the leprous distilment whose effect holds such an enmity with blood of man, that swift as quicksilver it courses through the natural gates and alleys of the body, and with sudden vigor doth it possess, and curd like eager droppings into milk, and thine and wholesome blood. So did it mine, and a most instant tetter barked about most Lazar-like with vile and loathsome crust all my smooth body. Thus was I sleeping by a brother's hand, of life, of crown, of queen at once dispatched, cut off even the blossoms of my sin, unhouselled, disappointed, unnanneled, no reckoning made, but sent to my account with all my imperfections on my head. Oh horrible, oh horrible, oh horrible, most horrible. If thou hast nature in thee, bear it not. Let not the royal bed of Denmark be a couch for luxury and damned incest. But howsoever thou pursuest this act, taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. Leave her to heaven, and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. Fare thee well at once. The glowworm shows the maiden to be near, and gins to pale his ineffectual fire. Adieu, adieu, adieu. Remember me. I warned you I was going to do that.
I have no issue. I have no problem. As a matter of fact, I actually kind of like the escalation. If you haven't, I don't know if you realize you do that, but you have this, you start off and then you escalate and then you got this like peak and valley sort of. Anyway,
that's how you got to read Shakespeare. That's how you got to read it. That's how you got to hear it in your head. I mean, this is early modern English. Like this is the crossover from English that Chaucer wrote in. It's English that was closer to what we understand as English. And now we're in like post late modern English. We're like, well, we say a lot of like, and he's all, and she's all, and they're all, and this all. Yeah. So we're in a totally different space. 600 years from now, they'll be looking at our stuff going, what does this all mean? What is like?
What are they talking about? Why do they keep saying like? What are they liking? What do they like? I don't understand.
What's this like thing?
No, but there's, what's interesting is listening to that back and because I think sometimes we lose. I think there's a reason that we get enthralled with movies and television and theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody else acting it out gives you the ability to allow your mind to wander while they're acting it out. When you are the one reading it, you can't do that, right?
Right.
You actually literally, it has to be literal, not literary. It has to be verbatim. Like, there's no real creative thoughts to get. I was thinking about this as you were reading this going, there's a couple of things that, again, if you're looking at this from several different factors, right? Like, okay, was he mentally ill? Or was it that he physically observed something that he didn't recognize at the time, and now his brain is interpreting it for him?
There you go.
Right? So he's not mentally ill, but something happened to his dad. He saw somebody carry the poison. He saw something that it didn't trigger in his brain until he had this episode with the ghost. And this is the ghost is his internal being telling him he saw something that wasn't right in the world, right? Or maybe it is truly the ghost. I don't know. I'm just saying maybe it is truly the ghost, and the ghost is saying, "Hey, be careful, son, because you're next. Like if they're gonna kill me, you gotta watch out for yourself."
Well, and the ghost talks about damnation.
Yeah, right.
The ghost talks about going to hell. I mean, so that's the Christian elements, because Shakespeare, unlike Spencer, who wrote The Fairy Queen and other ones, was very much interested in reinterpreting the Dionysian aspects of Christianity back into the Apollonian aspects of literature.
Right.
So go ahead.
And there was a line about the queen in there. I forget, supposedly, I forget how he worded it, but I should have wrote it down. I'll even go here. So I was thinking about, because I highlighted a bunch of this, but he talks about the death, obviously the poison being poured into his ear. Taint not thy mind. Here it is. Taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. Don't take revenge against your mother. Right.
Leave her to heaven, and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge, leave her to her guilt, to prick and sting her.
So he's basically saying she was part of it, but she didn't do it. Like it was like she knew about it, but she didn't stop it, and she knew about she's okay with it, so let her out. Like I'm just thinking so, or is he truly just mentally ill and made all this stuff up in his brain to justify the fact that he hates the fact that his uncle is now his dad? Well,
and let's be real.
True mental illness, right? True mental illness. Creating this stuff in his own brain because he's justifying his hatred for his new king.
And this is that Apollonian Christianity showing back up, right? Yeah. Shakespeare's making a judgment here about killing your brother and marrying his wife. He
Right.
uses the word incest here.
Right. It's incestuous. Right.
Right. It's incestuous. And this is something that makes us kind of in the modern world, at least up until I would say the last, I think it probably started 15 years ago, but I would say within the last 5 years, we've become a little more, well, I won't say we, certain aspects of our culture, I'll frame it that way. If you look at the headlines of the New York Post, or you look at writings that are written by researchers that are published in the New York Times, you weirdly now have respectable people saying that incest is not a bad thing. And I know you're laughing. By the way, those of you who are listening, not watching this on video, when you watch the video, you'll see Tom crack up when I say this, but I've seen this already. I'm seeing the beginnings of this. I'm also seeing the beginnings of a whole bunch of other different things like polyamory and polygamy starting to come back into the conversation, which is, well, you know, really interesting. I take the position, I'll just be fully transparent on this. When you open the door to one thing, there is a slippery slope. That's why it's called a slope, and that's why it's slippery. Anyway.
Hey, I'll let me just chime in on this one too, because I have a different philosophy. To each his own. You can do whatever you want. I just know me. I have a hard enough time keeping one woman happy. There's no way I'm going to keep multiple happy. I wouldn't even try, even if I was interested in it. Why would I even attempt it? I would go. I'd have even less hair than I have right now.
It's
But
okay. We're gonna put that. We're gonna park that over there for just a minute.
Whatever. I just wouldn't do it. But it's just because, anyway. Go ahead.
My point about incest, though, is this: Shakespeare had to make a point about culture in his time, and quite frankly, among the royals, among the powerful. And you see this in shows like, most notably Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones as a show on HBO.
And the book goes even more detail, by the way. So if you read the book, it's even more.
Okay. Yeah.
Like it goes off a cliff even harder. So.
Oh, I'm sure. So royalty, people in power have leveraged incestuous relationships for centuries. And Shakespeare's making a value judgment about this. He's saying, this is not good.
Yeah.
This is not going to end well. I mean, yeah, okay. You kill your brother, you marry his wife. His wife may turn out to be your cousin, or may turn out to be your aunt, or may turn out to be your sister. And by the way, Americans, just want to point this out, not immune from this. The Roosevelts, Eleanor and Franklin, were, if I remember correctly, and listeners, again, this is one of those other details you could correct me on, second or third cousins?
I thought it was second as well. So
yeah, second cousins. So Americans are not far away from this either. Keeping it in the family among powerful people is a thing. But this is also something, and we've talked about this on the podcast, both in shorts episodes and when we talked about Mrs. Dalloway. So the episode on Mrs. Dalloway, we mentioned this. I also mentioned it a little bit in Play It As It Lays this month. That was out earlier this year. You may want to go back and listen to both of those episodes as I fleshed out this idea I'm about to drop on you now. But this is a luxury belief. Incest as a method of maintaining quote unquote purity and bloodlines is an idea that is fine for the elites, but it doesn't work for the rest of us. And I shouldn't say fine for the elites because it's not even really fine for them. Shakespeare would say it's not fine for them either. It's not fine for anyone if we're actually behaving like we're supposed to be behaving. However, elites are often captured, and this is an idea from Rob Henderson, the writer and researcher Rob Henderson, who has articulated it really, really well in our time. And it's this idea that there are certain beliefs that elite people carry that have no consequence to them. So the belief that you can marry your sister and it doesn't matter, everything will just keep going just fine. Or the belief that you can flirt with certain ideologies and even adopt them, and even adapt them to your life. And by the way, it doesn't have anything to do with anybody else, and it's fine. Except the problem is the elites that adopt those luxury ideas set the boundaries of culture for everybody else.
Right.
They are the ones that at a practical level show us what is approved and what is not. And when they pull up all the boundaries And when they pull up all the fence posts and set them on fire in the middle of the field, you got a real problem in your culture. And I think Shakespeare was hinting at some of that here with the ghost and using the voice of the ghost to make that cultural critique. What would he say now? When we think about the events of Hamlet, when we think about William Shakespeare as a writer, we have to sort of go into a little bit of how this is actually put together. And I want to pull some interesting pieces from the Folger Shakespeare Libraries edition of Shakespeare, not the one we're directly reading from, but another one that I have here available sitting next to me. And it's the textual introduction by Barbara Mowat and Paul Werstein. And I want to point out a couple of things that they point out here as we talk about a little bit about the literary life of William Shakespeare. Many ordinary readers assume that there is a single text for the plays, what Shakespeare wrote. But Shakespeare's plays were not published the way modern novels or plays are published today, as a single authoritative text. In some cases, the plays have come down to us in multiple published versions, presented by various quartos, and by the great collection put together by his colleagues in 1623, called the First Folio. There are, for example, 3 very different versions of Hamlet, which is interesting, 2 of King Lear, Henry V, Romeo and Juliet, and others. Editors chose which version to use as their base text and then amended that text with words, lines, or speech prefixes from the other versions that, in their judgment, make for a better or more accurate text. And by the way, pause here for just a second. They were writing for people who would read out loud. So the idea of reading silently, and we've never really sort of brought this up on this podcast, but this is as good as time as any to bring this up. The idea of reading silently and keeping the words in your head is something that only really occurred or began to occur in the space of humanity and in human civilization in the right around the late 19th century. For the vast majority of literate history, people would read out loud because there was no television, there was no radio. The voice was the way you read this, right? It was the way you experienced the text. And so Tom was talking about my voice going up and down and those kinds of things. Everybody did that. And the level of the talent to which you had to be able to bring to that would either bore your audience sitting around a roaring fire at 7 o'clock at night, or it would entrance your audience and keep them up long after the embers of the fire had died down.
So what you're saying is what I used to do with my kids was just embedded naturally into me. So
yes.
When I used to read bedtime stories to my kids, I used to make up voices and characters all the time because I didn't want them to get bored with me just reading the text right out of the book.
Oh yeah, my wife calls it a clown show. I put on a clown show for my kids. Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, and this is why I like the when I read the Bible, I like the King James version of the Bible. I like the these and thous and the verilies, and I put on the what's his name? God from that movie, the black fella. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman. Yeah. For me, he's the voice of God. That's
he played the best God ever. I don't know why anyone's going to argue with that. So I can't.
Even God gives 3 stars. He gives 4 stars to Morgan Freeman's approach. It's like, no, that's it. That's it. But I'll read it in the Morgan Freeman voice, right? But you had to do that. You had to capture your readers, or you had to capture your listeners' attention, right? And of course, the more intimate the writing, the smaller the voice, right? So a Jane Austen book would be read in a different sort of contextual voice in a home than Shakespeare. Plus, people did go, not only the middle class and the upper class, but also the lower class did experience Shakespeare's plays live. So they had some conception coming down through the generations into the 17th, 18th, and 19th century of what it should, quote unquote, sound like.
Yeah, and not unlike today, Shakespeare himself had input into that. So
absolutely,
he would see his plays being performed and say, well, no, that needs to be in this tone, or that needs to be in this light. you're supposed to have a smile on your face when you say that, or you know what I mean. So
Right.
not unlike the writers of today, like they that have you write the book or you write that now you're a consultant on the film, or so
Right.
like it's the same idea that concept has not drifted. So
No. Well, and it really it can't drift, because if it did, I think what you would see is a collapse of cognition. And I'm going to use a big term there, but a collapse of cognition of the written word itself. So this is one of the things that worries me about, and this is one of the reasons why I do the podcast. It's not just for leaders, this podcast, although it is, but it's also to read a book out loud, right? To revisit some of that, because your brain does need more than just the internalization of the words.
well, and I guess and what little snippet that we just spoke about, I again translate it back into corporate, right?
Yeah.
Being a leader, if you're going to write a strategic plan, that
Yeah.
does not mean you can drop it in the laps of your subordinates and walk away.
Mm-mm.
You need to be able to drop your written word into the laps and then mold it as it goes, because you don't want them interpreting it the wrong way.
Exactly.
You don't
Yeah.
want them going down the wrong path too far that you have to then jerk them back versus lead them back, right? Like it's
Yep.
so I guess in the same sense, even writing corporate documents in corporate doctrine, you still have to, as a leader, still have to do the same thing that we're talking about these writers doing.
Well, and you see this in the last few years when Bezos was at Amazon. He got so frustrated with engineers overusing PowerPoint.
Yeah.
PowerPoint's not a presentation tool. He was like, get rid of that crap. You come in here with a pencil or a marker and a whiteboard and get after it. If you can't explain what you're doing in the concepts here verbally from the top of your head, and get that into other people's brains, if you need the crutch of PowerPoint behind you, you don't know your job. You're not, to go back to something that we mentioned earlier, you're not competent. It's one of the core competencies, because we can find anybody to do the engineering thing. We can't find just anybody to do the engineering and the presenting thing. And so I think we forget some of that in our time. And that's why we do the podcast in the way that we do it. Back to the textual introduction here. There's a couple of other points I want to jump off of here. Other editorial decisions, and I want to talk a little about editorial decisions too, because this is very important with Shakespeare. Other editorial decisions involve choices about whether an unfamiliar word could be understood in light of other writings of that period, or whether it should be changed. Decisions about words that made it into Shakespeare's text by accident through 400 years of printings and misprinting, and even decisions based on cultural preferences and taste. When the Moby text was created, for example, it was deemed improper and indecent for Miranda to chastise Caliban for having attempted to rape her. See The Tempest, Act 1, Scene 2. Abhorred slave, which any print of goodness wilt not thou take. Be capable of all ill, I pitied thee. All Shakespeare editors at the time took the speech away from her, meaning Miranda, and gave it to her father, Prospero, because it was more decent for the father to talk about the rape than about Miranda to talk about her own rape in The Tempest. The editors of the Moby Shakespeare produced their text long before scholars fully understood the proper grounds on which to make the thousands of decisions that Shakespeare editors face. Now, I want to pause there, because they're going to make a point about Othello and Henry V and Hamlet. I don't want to get quite into that just yet. There's an important idea there. And we don't often talk about editorial decisions on this podcast in our texts. But tying it back into leadership, leaders make editorial decisions. We editorialize all the time. We, in our minds, curate and sort through and validate and choose what to pay attention to and what to reject. Like I was recently in a well, not recently. I am currently in a negotiation, and I'll leave it at that. I cannot go into details because it's a private negotiation, so I won't go into details about it. But it's a pretty significant one, involving a significant sum of money and ideas of value, right, around that the object being negotiated over and what the value is either way, right? In order to do that negotiation, I'm going to edit. And nobody thinks that that's weird, by the way. Everybody does the same thing. It's only weird when you point it out, the editing is happening. I'm going to curate what I'm going to bring to that negotiation and what I'm not. I'm going to curate for the other person what I'm going to allow them to put on me and what I'm going to imprint on them. And I am going to imprint on them, except the difference between them and myself is I'm going to be intentional about what I imprint on them. They're going to be more reactive to me. And that's sort of how this negotiation is going. Okay. And dealing with consequences and living with outcomes is another part of that curation, but that lies on the other side of the equal sign. Leaders editorialize all the time. Leaders curate all the time. Leaders make cultural, and I love how the point was made here in the introduction. Leaders make cultural preference and taste decisions all the time. How can we use Hamlet as leaders to understand that taste decision? Because there's multiple different versions of Hamlet running around, and I want to talk a little bit about the movies now. You know, I watched the Kenneth Branagh version. There's a Mel Gibson version of Hamlet. There's a version of Hamlet starring Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, Ian McKellen. There's a version of Hamlet. There's a version of Hamlet that your kids have done at school. Maybe not the whole thing, but at least a couple of acts. I know that Hamlet has been inserted, and we already talked about Succession and Kings and Sons of Anarchy, but has been inserted. Elements of Hamlet have been inserted into popular culture, and of course that ties back to the Isaac Asimov joke about, you know, just strings of quotes being strung together because it's so ubiquitous. It's such a ubiquitous strategy, and yet people don't know what version of Hamlet they're quoting from. When the ghost says "murder most foul," that was, I believe, also a title of an Agatha Christie story.
Yes.
This is where you get into Shakespeare being almost, and this is why we do it on the podcast, almost at the foundational level next to the Bible of Western literature. When other texts reference your stuff, you're at the bottom. Like you're the lodestone, you're the beginning, you're the root, right? And of course, Shakespeare would probably say, I rooted everything in the Bible, so the Bible lies at the bottom of all of it in Western literature. Eastern literature is not structured this way. Eastern literature is structured very differently.
Absolutely.
But Western literature is structured on editorializing, taste, preference, and of course, what's at the bottom, right? What can leaders do with all this information? What's the thing to pull from this? Yeah. I gave you the hard thing. I just teed it up. I just gave you the hard thing. Just go. Now all you gotta do is say "dang" and like pause for 10 minutes.
Yeah, right. I'm like, you know, I hadn't thought about it that way, and then that's the other word. Instead of saying "dang," I hadn't thought about it that way, and then you just pause for a good 2 minutes while you collect your thoughts and say, you know what? I have no idea.
No idea.
I'm just kidding. You know, honestly, I think. You know, I think part of it is if you yourself, you are a leader, Hassan. You yourself have a core principle that that is your foundation. But that does not mean that you can't take drips and drabs and pieces and parts from other people's leadership skills and qualities and learn those and use those and start. We do it all the time. We talk about guys like Jeff Bezos and Anthony Robbins and, you know, like we talk about those types of leaders all the time and how we use certain parts of it in certain parts of that. I'll give you one better. Again, I'll just refer it directly back to me. People often ask me, as a sales person, as a sales consultant, do I lend myself to a certain sales module or discipline, or meaning, do I use the Sandler sales methodology or the Challenger sales methodology or spin selling and my answer is always yes and no. I use all of them because here's the thing. As a salesperson, my responsibility is to know which one of those sales methodologies my customer is going to relate to most, and then adapt my selling style to the customer, not the other way around. I'm not going to pigeonhole a customer into forcefully eating or choking down a sales methodology, which, by the way, there's one in particular. I'm not going to name it because I won't discredit or hurt anybody here, but there's one in particular that if I recognize a salesperson using on me, I will shut them down in a second because it annoys the piss out of me. Right?
Yeah.
Like it
Okay.
just annoys me that salespeople use this methodology on people like me. Not that they
Right.
use the methodology, because methodology does work in other environments. It
Right.
works on other people. It will not work on me. So if you want to
On
sell
you.
me, don't use this, right? Like
Right.
so my philosophy in training and teaching and coaching is I want you to learn all of them. I want you to be, and again, I really need to learn this phrase better, Hassan. So that the original version of the phrase "jack of all trades," right?
Yes. Yeah.
That whole "jack of all trades, master of none," and all of a sudden we have interpreted this as a negative thing, and it was not a negative
Yes.
quote when it first came out.
Yes.
It was something like I won't butcher it, but go look up the quote.
Yeah.
Jack of all trades, master of none. Look up the original full quote. It essentially says that the jack of all trades is a better trait to have because you can pull from multiple sources.
Mm-hmm.
You can do multiple things. So yeah, I'm okay with being a jack of all trades. I'm okay with my salespeople knowing and understanding all of these sales philosophies and all of these sales methodologies because I want them to recognize which one is going to help them through the sales process better, faster, whatever, right?
Whatever.
So I guess that's kind of what you're thinking. But from a foundational standpoint, your sales have to come from one thing and one thing only. You have to be in it to be helpful. You have to be in it. I tell people all the time, a salesperson should never talk you into anything. A salesperson should help you buy.
Yep.
Right? There's a big difference in that. Talking somebody into something that they don't really need or want, or helping them buy something they feel is going to help them improve their life, make it better, faster, bigger, whatever they're trying to accomplish. You're helping them buy something that helps them solve that problem. You're not talking somebody into buying something.
Yeah.
Right. There's a foundational difference there. And as long as your foundational difference, as long as your foundation is right, then it doesn't matter which sales methodology you use, as long as your customer gets the end result. Right.
Well, and that goes back to this idea that, and you do get it from Hamlet, you get it from Greek literature, you get it from the Bible, you get it from modern literature. Spreading this out, you get it from interactions between people, even the smallest interactions at the smallest level. Like I was talking about the negotiation I'm going through. You're talking about sales methodologies. If I'm leading other people on my team, it also applies here. And it's a point that I made in college years and years and years ago. And most of my friends did not understand the point that I was making. And I was a little bit older than them. But as they have gotten older, they've understood it more. And this is the point. And this is the point you're saying. Western culture in general and American culture in particular are still results-oriented societies.
Yeah. For sure.
At the end of the day, we're still a results-oriented culture. So I see things on Facebook all the time from people pushing me various things through like NBA memes, right? I'm going to relate this to the NBA here. And the argument about Jordan versus LeBron, I'm not going to wade into on this podcast. This is not a sports talk podcast, but there is that argument that is going on. And one of the things I saw the other day was somebody who had made a post on Facebook and was randomly retconning Michael Jordan's entire career to basically say that without Phil Jackson, he would have been nothing. And I thought, and I did,
That's like saying Tom Brady would be nothing without Bill Belichick.
Right. I'm like, what do we? But this gets to the idea of results.
Yeah. Right.
At the end of LeBron's career, no matter how much he may like it or not like it, he's going to have a certain result.
Yeah.
At the end of Kobe's career, he had a result. At the end of Michael Jordan's career, there is a result. Currently, I think Tom Brady is continuing to remain retired. So There's
so far.
so far, as of the recording of this podcast.
Yeah.
Who knows what may happen in the future? But as of this recording today, he is currently remaining retired with a particular result. Okay. Results matter. That's all people pay for. People pay for outcomes. This is really hard for people to wrap their arms around when they want to use a particular methodology to do something and it doesn't lead to an outcome that they want. And then they want to blame the outcome, not the methodology.
Right.
Or if you're losing a negotiation, like if I lose a negotiation, it's because I had a piss poor methodology and I got the outcome that comes from using a piss poor methodology. I don't understand why this is hard. Well, yes, I do. I understand why this is hard for people to wrap their arms around. And for leaders, it's important for leaders to recognize the difference between the doctrine, the strategy, and the tactics. And I talked about this on Living the Martial Way episode that we did last year, the great Forrest Lee Morgan book, where he breaks down in martial arts terms the doctrine, which is sort of this overall philosophy or the methodology, the strategies, which is what we talk about here, sort of the mindset that you have to have in order to implement that philosophy. And then, of course, the thing that everybody only wants to know about, which is why don't anybody approach Tom with this particular selling practice, because he'll kick you out of the room. Tactics, because they're just using tactics. And people just want to use tactics because they think that that's the shortcut to the outcome. And there are no shortcuts to outcomes.
Absolutely not.
Back to the book, back to Hamlet. One other point that I want to make, and then we're going to jump into Ophelia and Polonius. I want to make a couple of points there because there are females. You wouldn't think so, but there are females in Hamlet. Ophelia is the secondary female character there, played by Kate Winslet in the Kenneth Branagh film. We didn't really touch on the films. One question about the films, because you're a film buff. Which is your favorite Hamlet version of Hamlet on film, or do you have one?
I don't think I really do have one, but I think if I was forced to pick one, it would probably be the Ian McClellan one.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
And mostly just because out of all the people that have played him, he's probably my favorite actor of that group of people.
Of that group of people. Yeah.
But not probably no more reason than that.
Well, and also I think, and this is a point we kind of skipped over, but Hamlet in the play is not a 35-year-old guy.
Yeah, right.
That's not the impression that I get. Even watching the Kenneth Branagh version, I was like, this guy's a little old.
Yeah.
A little old to be like scheming about your uncle. And the whole context of the play is, I don't know. It works really well if you're like 17.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. It should be a teenager, right? Like the whole concept behind what's going on, the whole, if it's not mental illness and it's his subconscious trying to convince himself of something,
right,
it works way better if he's a late teen.
16. maybe early 20s, you can push it.
Maybe. Yeah.
But after 25,
forget it. Yeah.
Forget it. Get over it. The world sucks. Move along.
You're lucky we didn't ship you off to Norway.
Exactly. Well, and that's the other dynamic here in Hamlet. So you do get the sense that he's writing it for an actor that's a little bit younger. And I do know in Shakespeare's plays, he did use young boys in many of his plays. Young boys played the female roles. Young boys obviously played the male roles and played the older character roles as well. And by the way, this wasn't anything unusual, right? This was something that was just done. Now, in our time, we object to that because we associate not necessarily maybe Hamlet, but some of his more, shall we say, sexually daring plays like Antony and Cleopatra is written with that. We just mentioned the sort of the inappropriateness of the rape of Miranda by Caliban in The Tempest. The entire plot of Taming of the Shrew was basically turned into 10 Things That I Hate About You. And it works, there. Once you take out the objectionable elements, by the way. So our modern ears, we want to Our modern Protestant Puritan influenced ears want to scrub all that from Shakespeare. And yet, just like a good artist, he was seeking to integrate all of that in there, make a judgment about it, just like the incest piece, and make that integration not just, you're talking about him watching his own plays and making changes, not just from what was on the page, but from what was practically being walked out on the stage. That's how you know he was a true artist.
And oh, by the way, if you didn't know that the movie 10 Things I Hate About You was a direct interpretation of The Taming of the Shrew, watch it again, because there's some Shakespearean stuff that happens in there that is blatantly obvious that they're giving Shakespeare the credit.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, and we're going to cover Taming of the Shrew on the podcast, and the person who's going to come on and talk with us, he's a huge fan of 10 Things I Hate About You. So we're gonna go deep off into that. Anyway. Last piece about sort of the literary life of William Shakespeare. Sort of a little part through here, just a side note to note. So let's talk about the Folger library editions and sort of what they've done differently in their editorial. I'm going to skip a couple of sentences down. The reader of the Folger Shakespeare, and go to this piece, and I quote, "The reader of the Folger Shakespeare knows where the text has been altered because editorial interventions are signaled by square brackets," which is nice. For example, from Othello, and then it's in square brackets, "If she in chains of magic were not bound," half square brackets, for example, from Henry V, with half square brackets, "blood and sword and fire to win your right," or angle brackets, for example, from Hamlet, "Oh, farewell, honest," angle brackets, "soldier who hath relieved you." At any point in the text, you could hover your cursor over a bracket for more information. Because Folger digital texts, and this is a point that I want to make, are edited in accord with 21st century knowledge about Shakespeare's texts, the Folger here provides them to readers, scholars, teachers, actors, directors, and students free of charge, confident of their quality as texts of the plays, and pleased to be able to make this contribution to the study and enjoyment of Shakespeare. If you have an opportunity to get the Folger text, get it, particularly the digital version. There are sort of some sub things that pop up, and some interesting other dynamics that are in that text. And I will say this for, I obviously, the modern age that we are in does have a lot of troubles and problems. Don't get me wrong. But we do benefit from being able to look back over the long course of a millennia of history, being able to pull the best parts of that forward, and make some scholarly editorial decisions that actually benefit us and grow our knowledge. And to be able to do that without an ideological lens is the sign of a true scholar. And so picking up the Folger Shakespeare texts is well worth your time. All right, back to the book, back to Hamlet, back to the play, Hamlet. Going to go to Act 2, Scene 1. So Polonius and his man Reynaldo are speaking. I'm going to kind of jump cut to away from Polonius and Reynaldo for a moment, but this does set up the entering of Ophelia. And so let's meet Ophelia. This is sort of the first time we meet her in Hamlet. Enter Ophelia. "How now, Ophelia? What's the matter?" This is Polonius. Ophelia. "Oh, my lord, I have been so affrighted." Polonius. "With what, in the name of God?" Ophelia. "My lord, as I was sewing in my closet, Lord Hamlet with his doublet all embraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered and down give to his ankles, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous and purport, as if he had been loose out of hell, to speak of horrors, he comes before me." Polonius. "Mad for love?" Ophelia. "My lord, I do not know, but truly I do fear it." Polonius. "What said he?" Ophelia. "He took me by the wrist and held me hard. Then he goes he to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand thus o'er his brow, he falls to such perusal of my face as I would draw it. Long stayed he so. At last, a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound, as it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. That done, he lets me go, and with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of doors he went without their helps, and to the last bended their light on me. Polonius, come, go with me. I will go see the king. This is the very ecstasy of love, whose violent property foredoes itself and leads the will to desperate undertakings, as oft as any passions under heaven that does afflict our natures. I am sorry. What hath you given him? Any hard words of late? Ophelia, no, my good lord, but as you did command, I did repel his letters and denied his access to me. Polonius, that hath made him mad. I am sorry that with better heed and judgment I had not quoted him. I feared he did but trifle and meant to rack thee, but beshrew my jealousy. By heaven, it is proper to our age to cast beyond ourselves in our opinions, as it is common for the younger sort to lack discretion. Come, go we to the king. This must be known, which, being kept close, might move more grief to hide than hate to utter love. Come. Exit. Polonius and Ophelia. It turns out from that little clip, a couple of things. Turns out that fathers watching out for their daughters is not a new thing. That's time as old as mine. It also turns out that women and men being mistaken in their communication with each other is also about as old as time. Hamlet comes to Ophelia having just had an interaction with the ghost of his father, and he's freaked out. He's pale, he's shattered all the way down, unfettered, as they say, meaning not that his clothes are undone, but meaning that his emotions are undone.
He's exposed emotionally.
Exposed emotionally, correct. Vulnerable, right? Comes to his one true love, Ophelia, and she misinterprets it as matrimonial lust or desire or love. Or she is so disturbed by this and not knowing how to accurately interpret it, she seeks out the wisdom of counsel of her father, and Polonius, who is doing his own deal with Longshanks, decides he's going to use this to get something that he wants from the king, the uncle of Hamlet, and to continue to play power politics with the hand of his daughter. Almost a tale as old as time. What shall we do with Ophelia? Now, as a character, she's positioned as a foil, but she's also used as a tool to move the narrative forward, right? To move Polonius forward, to move Hamlet forward. She's also used in the later acts of the play to judge Hamlet, and she's abandoned, right? Both by, and this is a feminist interpretation of Hamlet, by the way, she's abandoned by both Hamlet to madness, to chasing the ghost and revenge down a path that she cannot go. And she's abandoned by the king, who Polonius has entrusted her to, as the king of Denmark begins to figure out that Hamlet's up to something and that he might want to watch his six. There's always B characters in an organization. There's always B players. Steve Jobs infamously said that A players hire A players and B players hire B players, and he didn't go much further than that. He said the quiet part out loud back in the day when you weren't supposed to do that. There's always going to be B and C players in an organization. And even among A players, there's going to be differentiation, and there's going to be tussles in hierarchy. And there's always going to be those people who are going to get stepped on because they don't understand the game, they don't understand the hierarchy, and they don't know what's happening.
Either that, or some of them allow themselves to get stepped on because that's also just part of their personality.
Correct. And Ophelia is one of those characters. Yeah. For the Ophelias who are listening to the podcast, male or female. I'm agnostic on gender on this. Ophelia is merely a name to me. What's some good advice for them? Because they're the ones who get jerked back and forth. I know what I would tell them. Yeah, I would tell them, I would tell them you got to get your head in the game, because the game is happening to you, whether you want it to happen to you or not. But many people struggle with hearing that message. So maybe there's a different way to deliver it, or maybe that's not the message.
Well, I mean, quite honestly, I have no problem with that message, but the clarity of that message might be different to different people, right? So, for example, meaning get your head in the game because the game is happening around you, whether you want it to or not, does not necessarily mean that you have to change who you are and change your personality. But if you're going to be, again, like we just said a second ago, if you're going to be the type of person that allows that stepping, then you need to know, be prepared, and know who you're going to allow to step on in you, who you're not, and why, and what the outcomes are going to be because of you being stepped on. If you're okay with the outcome, okay, I get it. Everybody plays their role. Everybody has their part. But if you're going to be stepped on to just be stepped on, and you have no benefit, nothing gained out of that stepping, then you're in the wrong spot. You are the wrong stepping stone. You just need to move the staircase so that you get some sort of benefit out of people stepping on you. Again, it takes all kinds, right? So I'm not suggesting if you're the type of person that is okay with people stepping on you, I get it. I'm not, but I get it. I try very hard. When I find those people in my organizations, if I find that person and I recognize that that's the kind of person that is okay being stepped on, I want to know, I go out and seek it out myself. What do you hope to gain by allowing people to step on you? I don't try to change them. I don't try to change their mentality. I don't try to change their personality. I try to change their outcome. Yeah. So I try to look at it and go, I understand you're being stepped on here. Oh no, it's okay. I get it. Okay. Well, if you're going to be stepped on, what do you gain out of this? What is the benefit of this? Because there are some of those things. I heard a phrase when I was very, very young that I still believe in today. And it's, be good to people on the way up because you're going to see them on the way down, right? So that same person that you stepped on to get higher and higher and higher, when the time comes that you're coming down, they may be in the same spot, but now all of a sudden you are lower than them. So again, there's always something to, there has to be an angle. And as long as you know and understand your angle, I'm okay with you being somebody who gets stepped on, as long as it's not to your detriment.
Well, and also to the people doing the stepping. Now, we see this also in Hamlet, right? So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? Those two characters were kind of buddies of Hamlet. You know, they're kind of his advisors, right? They are, it kind of reminded me a little bit of sort of the advisors of the king that came after Solomon, Rehoboam, back in Kings, right? You know, he had advisors around him who were young, and then he had the wise men. And first he asked the wise men what he should do with the kingdom of Judah, I believe it was. And the wise men gave him wise counsel. And then he went to his buddies and his buddies gave him the counsel of 21-year-olds. And he took the counsel of the 21-year-olds. And he should have taken the counsel of the older men. And thus a civil war was ignited in Israel, right? Well, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are sort of these, I wouldn't really say comedic, but they walk that line. Yeah, they walk that line of kind of comedic, kind of your good time buddies, right?
The buffoons.
The buffoons, right? Well, they're the people who my father would have said back in the day when I was a kid. He would have asked me the question. I'm sure your father asked you a variation of this question. I'm sure fathers all over ask their kids this question. If all of your friends jumped off a cliff, would you jump off of the cliff too? Now, the genuine answer to that, if you're like between 10 and 17, is yes, of course I would. I mean, like, why? It seems ridiculous.
My thought, if they're jumping off the bridge, there's a reason. Like, I'm going to jump with them because I'm not, either they're jumping into water because it's fun. They're being chased by a bear. So it's life or death. I don't know. There's got to be something. Yeah, anyway.
Exactly. And this is a disconnect question because you're asking it from the perspective of, I jumped off that cliff between 10 and 17. And it turned out there were rocks down there. But you can't tell that to somebody who's between 10 and 17. And so, Hamlet's got his buddies. He's got Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. But they're not structured as people who are getting stepped on.
Yeah.
They're structured as buffoons. They're structured as the clown in the court, right? And the clown in the court, and this is why comedians are worth protecting. The clown in the court doesn't get stepped on. That's not his role or her role. The role of the jester is to point out the fact that no one has any pants on and to be left alone, because that's their job.
Right. Right.
You also will have the jester on your team. I think a lot of modern organizations, a lot of modern teams don't know how to spot the jester. And what worries me ideologically, yes, what worries me ideologically is we've placed with certain ideological tendencies, particularly in the, and I'll go ahead and say it so Tom doesn't have to, particularly in the DE&I space, we've taken the jokesters and we've said we're going to wring all the humor out. We're going to wring it all out. And we're going to take that jester. We're going to take the Rosencrantz and the Guildenstern. We're going to take the people who would have you jump off a cliff. And we're going to be like, no, we're not jumping off a cliff. There's no more cliff jumping going on.
And what's one step further, especially, and again, from a corporate environment, we've extended that beyond the corporate walls, right? Yeah. So now those jesters are no longer allowed to be jesters, even in a social environment, if there's enough of the corporate people present. Right? Like, so we're extending it now. So it's not even within the play. It's within the plays, like it's outside of the play.
Now we've gone into the audience. You've gone into the audience. Yeah.
Right. We're going to go in the aisles, right? So, and in the corporate world, it's the same idea. To your point, we did that, but we also extended our corporate walls beyond the building and put it into our personal lives, which I'm not really sure how much I like and don't like. There's parts of it that really need to stop. And then there are other parts of it I get. Like, so it's kind of weird. Well, I get in a weird space with this.
Well, and this is a social negotiation. This is sort of what I get back to, right? So I think of the line from The Devil's Advocate, right? Are we negotiating? And the answer to that question is, of course, we're negotiating. We're always negotiating. I wonder, and we will never know the percentages. We will never know. So we just have to speculate. What are the percentages of the jesters? What are the percentages of the Ophelias? What are the percentages of the Uncle King? What are the percentages of the Hamlets? What are the percentages of the Queen who went along just to go along because they needed survival? You got those folks out there too.
Sure.
What are the percentages of the hangers-on? What are the percentages of the Horatio at the beginning who just don't understand what's happening and need to go report that? I think of Horatio at the beginning who initially saw the ghost and did not know what they were seeing, and then had to go report it to Hamlet because they're like, I don't know what we're doing with this, right? Played infamously by what's his name from a Grumpy Old Man in which was a total surprise in the Kenneth Branagh Hamlet that I just watched recently. What's his name? Jack
Lemmon.
Jack Lemmon. Yeah, Jack Lemmon played Horatio, and it was weird seeing Shakespeare come out of Jack Lemmon's mouth. I was like, that's very. It was a little disconcerting for me at the beginning, and then I just sort of let my brain go and I just went with it. And it works. It's fine. Like, he does his job. He does what he's supposed to do. Moves the narrative along. But my point is, the percentages of those people in society, then they all have roles to play. Like you said, we need all kinds. But where are the boundaries? Right? Where are the boundaries? Where does the social negotiation say stop? Right? And that is the difference between libertarianism and libertine philosophies. And I'm not speaking, even though I want to be very clear, I'm not speaking of this out of my own personality setup, right? So I'm highly conscientious. I'm kind of moderate on anxiety and on neuroticism. And I'm kind of moderate on openness, right? But I'm high on conscientiousness, duty, and I'm kind of a little bit lower on empathy than I probably should be. I'm not speaking from that. I want to be very clear. I absolutely know that the boundaries have to be pushed in order to have creativity and growth and development and innovation. And what are the boundaries? And so my concern is that in the social negotiation, we've sort of forgotten how to ask that question about where the boundaries are. And that's going to be different for everybody, based on their life experience. And I don't know how you do that dance with 330 million people on a continent. I don't know how you do it, which is why the creed matters. That's why, for me, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution matter, because at the end of the day, what else are you going to appeal to? Those are the things that matter.
Right. Yeah,
They've been around 400 years, longer than I've been around. Okay, let's just use that. But that's where I come down. I'm a partisan for that. So, as many know who have listened to the podcast. One last question about Ophelia before we move into Act 3 here. I want to make a point. I'm going to give Hamlet another go here, and then we're gonna wrap up because we've been talking about him for a while. As the play begins to open up, right? We get Hamlet and the three of the players, and I'm not really clear on what the role of the players is, and maybe some folks can help me out with that. But as we go into the third act of Hamlet, one of the things that we begin to realize is there's a lot of buildup to what he's eventually going to do. There's a lot of tugging him along and pulling him along and sort of drawing him in, right, to a dynamic that he's not really comfortable with. You would think that a person who recognizes that his father is dead and his ghost has spoken to him, you would think that he'd jump right to revenge. Like, I'm going to go walk into the throne room and I'm going to kill the king like right away, right? And that's not what happens.
But again,
it's
that's how
slow
a
buildup.
35-year-old would do it, right? Like, we keep saying this should be a 17-year-old because that's not what they would do. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. No, that's right. Well, and if if you're going to kill the king, you do it in the court in front of everybody. And you don't miss. By the way, I got that bit of knowledge from The Wire. Great show. If you ever have an opportunity to watch it. If you're going to kill the king, you kill him in his court, and you don't miss. You make sure you don't miss. Gangs of New York was also infamous for this.
Yes.
And unfortunately, DiCaprio missed because Daniel Day-Lewis, you can't kill that guy. Ultimate villain of villains. By the way, would have been a much better king. I would love to see Shakespeare come out of Daniel Day-Lewis's mouth.
Oh, that would be cool. Actually, yeah, I agree.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be amazing? Oh my gosh.
I think, yeah.
Oof, got a little chill right there, just thinking about it. and then you have some CW actor to be Hamlet. And then you just got to put him in scenes with Daniel Day-Lewis, and Daniel Day-Lewis he'll just eat the scenery, and the kid will just be scared, and you'll get the actual dynamic of Hamlet there. The question becomes, if you're a leader and you don't quite know where the social negotiation is going, or where the sale is going, or what the outcome is going to be, and you are wandering through looking for where the buildup is, how do you maintain patience? Because this is the thing I think Shakespeare's doing with Hamlet. He's showing how the buildup happens because he wants his audience to be patient. He doesn't want the payoff to come immediately. Like you said, that's something that an immature person would want, is the payoff to come immediately. But a mature writer like Shakespeare knows, no. The thing is in the buildup.
Yeah.
How do leaders deal with the buildup?
Well, I here's the thing. This part, this is a very loaded question. Only because we've already talked about how our society today is very results driven, right?
Right.
We rely on them. We bank on them. We if it's not for results, it doesn't happen, so to speak, right? I don't know how much we are afforded patience.
Yeah.
Never mind whether the corporate wants it or not. I don't know how much we're afforded it.
Yeah.
In a sense, right? So I think there are other roles outside of my world that deserve more patience than sales, right? So salespeople are, and I tell people, this to me, I find fascinating in one sense. When and you talked about the DEI earlier, so I'm gonna make a comment here where I have never in my career worried about the age, race, color, sex, gender. None of that mattered. I looked at, did you hit your quota or not?
Right.
And if you didn't hit your quota that month, did we support you the same way we would support everybody else? If that answer is yes, then you're fired, right? I could fire somebody strictly based on very calculated things. It had zero to do with color, race, sex, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Right. So
all those other extra things that we.
now take sales out of it.
Yep.
Secretarial people, administrative people. Yeah, that's different, right? Like that, it's very different. Where does that line draw? I'm fortunate I've never had to deal with that. Like I've always been dealing with sales and marketing people where I had clear ROI, clear numbers, KPIs are very clear. It's clear. You either are valuable to us or you're not. And that's it. Like,
well, and that's where I worry, like in sales and marketing, if the large language model algorithms are truly the thing that we're going to move towards, which it looks like we are.
Yeah.
And sales will be immune to some of this more so than marketing, which is already kind of 90% down the rabbit hole. Forget it.
Yeah.
I was even talking with people, some of my internal marketing folks today in my organization, and we were just like, okay, well, we've already got automation working on this one part, so let's just translate this over to here, because like, and it's mainly my ego is kind of done with it now. I don't need to be at the core of it. So now that I don't need to be at the core of it, now that my ego's done, let's just let's just go, and it's 90%. Let's just go. And with that being said, at the end of the day, people still buy from people on the sales end. So you can automate the blast of emails all day.
Sure.
And you can automate the webinar. And you can even automate the phone call, but you can't automate the signing on the dotted line.
Right.
So sales will be immune to this for a while. However, at a certain point, I would tell you, Tom, I think you're going to get caught. I think sales and marketing is going to get caught, in particular sales, because that's sort of the last bastion of resistance for the jester. That's the last bastion of resistance for the round hole, the round peg that won't go into the square hole. They can hide in sales, and totalizing approaches to ideology don't allow for anything outside of that system.
I already don't think we're immune to that social pressure, though, that gesture pressure. I don't think we're immune to that at all. I really do think, because again, there are you could be the number one salesperson in the company. If you do something that is outside of that social norm far enough, you're fired anyway. But the social norm sort of expands a little bit more for sales. Not as much as you might think.
Okay. All right.
Not as much as you might think. I think that again, like I'm going to take my client out to dinner, or I'm going to take my team, my team hit 120% a quarter. So I'm going to take my team out for a couple drinks.
Sure.
That social environment still holds. If somebody says something and that you're getting reported back to the office, there's people in trouble. I don't, it's really not, not, now where there is a little leeway, to your point, is somebody could say something, we'll use the term off color because people just know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Somebody could, if it's the amount of off color.
Okay.
It's a little bit broader.
Yeah.
Right?
The shading is a little bit, okay. Yeah.
Because you might have that number one sales rep. She says something that's a little inappropriate, and you get pulled aside and go, hey, calm that down a little. And they go, oh, okay, sorry. It's not, so you're right to a degree of, but it's not as broad as you might think. It's really been, I would say in the last 5 years, it's been tightening much more than the 15 years before that.
Wow. Okay.
But it really is there.
Right. And I'm not exclusively in sales. I mean, I know sales for what I do, but I'm not exclusively in that space broadly. And so, I know for what I do, it's always been tight. It always is because it's just kind of the nature of leadership development. That's kind of the nature of conflict management or negotiation. If you're selling those types of products, you better be buttoned down. You just better be, because there's certain areas of confidentiality that if you show up as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, people aren't going to trust you. They're just going to be like, yeah, I'm not I don't know if what I'm saying is going to wind up coming out your mouth later on. So you gotta kind of move away from that. You got to be more Polonius than Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, quite frankly. And people don't always wrap. It's sometimes hard for people to wrap their arms around that idea.
Sure.
But in general, I would have thought that sales would have been a little bit more immune to it because it's just some of the funky things I see on the edges and on the corners. But maybe you're right. Maybe things are totalizing all the way out. And my thought on that is you wind up at the end with sales that is denuded of personality.
Well,
and that's a real struggle.
I argue with you can have personality and you can tell those same jokes, clean it up. Like you can still be like, I wouldn't try to change somebody's personality, but again, by an off-color comment.
Sure.
Could you make it a little less off-color? And most of them, yes. Most of them can be like.
Does it also go with the product you're selling? Because this is the other dynamic, is at the core. Remember, I was talking about the core of the apple, right?
Yeah.
So at the core of the apple of sales is, quite frankly, no one who's in sales really wants to admit this, but it's true. It's what you're selling, and just as much as how you sell it.
Sure.
So if I'm selling furniture, I'll just use this as an example. If I'm selling furniture in a sort of warehouse furniture style situation, I'm getting paid commission off of how many beds I move in a week. I'm selling furniture. Like, there's really no call for me to be weirdo about selling furniture. There's really no call, right? Customer's going to come in. They're already going to know what they want. My job is to facilitate. I mean, I bought furniture from salespeople at one of these warehouse places. Quite frankly, they didn't sell me anything. They just showed up with a bunch of paperwork. Like, and I know their title is salesperson, but they weren't selling me anything. Okay. Whereas that process will work maybe with furniture and cars and maybe potentially computer hardware. But when you're talking about things that are more ephemeral, right? Like air, ideas, content, books, movies, software in your case, right?
Yeah.
It's a little more loosey-goosey, right? Or is that again another space of shades, right? And maybe I'm conflating too many things together, which I'll admit, maybe I am.
It's a bit of an oversimplification for sure.
Okay.
But I do think that. So I actually think your analogy or your example of the selling furniture lends to being like, you have to be more conscious of what you say. You have to bite the tongue more. Think about it. Me and my wife go in and we're going to look for a couch. And the sales guy is like the old school, like, oh, could you imagine what you could do on this couch? Like,
right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It could lead to a lot of things that you shouldn't say. Right.
Right. Like, yeah, this is true.
But they don't, because they've been trained, and they're trained to sell the furniture, whatever, right? And in software, you don't have those types of like opportunities, right? It's not.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're usually talking. So here's the other thing. This is really where I tell people to be the most careful.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the rapport building part that you have to be careful.
Yes,
not in when you're selling the product or service. When you're selling the ones and zeros of software, or you're selling the the HVAC job or whatever that is, like, it's not about the actual sale that you need to be careful about what you're saying. It's in the rapport building phase where you're trying to make connections on an external level, or you're trying to talk about their life, their kids, their house, their whatever, and you're trying to like make that connection. You're building that bond of trust with them. That's where you run the danger of saying something that is really not appropriate, and you're going to go. But again, So here's the thing, and really good sales trainers that I have known in my past, and one of the quote unquote rules of thumb that I use, you can build. This is exactly what I was talking about to you earlier. There's no reason that you have to use all of those personal things to build rapport. You can build rapport on a professional basis. You can use your profession to build the rapport, not the personal stuff. If the personal stuff comes, it should come after, when you're maintaining and you're building relationship, not rapport.
Got it.
So again, and that's a very trained thing. Like that doesn't come inherently. You have to be taught when you're building rapport, the rapport should be based on the fundamental relationship that's in front of you, not the relationship you want to build later.
Right. Right.
To
Yeah.
keep that customer coming back over and over
Over
again,
and over again.
is when you start extending it beyond those. And by the way, if you cannot read the room in that scenario, you shouldn't be in sales.
Yeah.
You
If you're,
should be able
yeah.
to know
Yeah. I would
where
agree with
the, if you're going to color outside the lines after you get to that point, once you do get to that personal point, if you're going to color outside the lines, you better damn well know how far outside lines you can go. And if you don't, if you can't judge that, you probably shouldn't be in sales in the first place.
I'm thinking of something that no. I'm thinking of a sales conversation that I was recently privy to, and I'll bring it up later with Tom, and we'll discuss if we could bring it up on the podcast in a future episode, because it relates exactly to what Tom just said about coloring outside the lines. And I think that that's a fundamental distinction with the difference that Tom has just brought up. That's hugely important for leaders to understand, because leaders are salespeople. That is one of the fundamental things. Actually, it's in my book. It's in chapter 5. Leaders should study sales and marketing. You need to study the techniques of sales and marketing. Doesn't mean you have to be a sales manager or a sales lead. It doesn't mean you have to be the CMO. It means you have to know the techniques and the tactics and the skill sets and be able to apply those across a wide variety of people in a leadership context, because the thing you are selling is yourself and your leadership. That's fundamental to your success as a leader. And you're right, building rapport. Tom's right, building rapport, coloring outside the lines, learning who people are. You can't be in Ophelia in that situation. All right, back to the play. Last jog, round the corner. I'm going to let Hamlet here have the last word. He's going to talk a little bit about Ophelia. This is now Act 3, Scene 1. King comes in, talks with King and Queen come in. They talk with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Polonius. And the king then sends for Hamlet. And well, they kind of listen to Hamlet, kind of walking up the pathway, sort of thinking out loud. So let's be privy to some of Hamlet's internal structure here a little bit in Act 3, Scene 1. Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it's just nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say, we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. Hey, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect and makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despise, the love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietest make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzle the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickled o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and to lose the name of action. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph in thy orisons, be all my sins remembered.
Probably the most iconic monologue, right? of any piece of literature. It's like, as soon as you started saying it, like I was like, oh, I actually remember this. We had to memorize this in school. Like I actually remembered most of it, not all of it, but I was like, wow. I didn't realize how embedded that was.
It's deep in there, Tom. It's in the system. I thought that was a good spot to stop at.
Yeah.
Because that is the question: to be or not to be. Is it nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? Is it nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of having your career or the boundaries of social approbation coming in? Is that nobler?
I pictured this in the corporate world of somebody going, should I quit my job and go work for that one? That's the thing. Like, should I just deal with this? Am I better? Am I safer? Am I more, here and doing what I'm doing? Or should I quit my job and go take that risk?
To sleep, perchance to dream.
Yeah.
I'm going to dream about what's over there in that startup. Dream about like Scrooge McDuck, like jumping into $1 billion worth of coins and swimming around. If any of you watched DuckTales back in the day, you know who Scrooge McDuck is. And swimming around in those.
And if you didn't, you should.
Exactly. That's right. It was a great series. For in that sleep of death, what death? Physical death, material death, emotional death. For in that sleep of death,
professional death.
Professional death. What dreams may come? By the way, that's another great title to a movie that had Robin Williams and John Travolta in back in the day, where Robin Williams dies and goes to heaven or someplace. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil? Whose mortal coil? The mortal coil of Hamlet, the mortal coil of your job, the mortal coil of that room, of that remote structure you might be in right now, that hybrid structure where you got to like go to the office a couple of days out of the week and you're not getting anything out of it. Look, Johnny Paycheck put it a little bit more simply in the 1970s: take this job and shove it, because I ain't working here no more. And of course, in 2020, and I would argue we're still underneath the royal of this, people are figuring out that they don't need to tolerate what they don't need to tolerate. And I think this is the other thing you're probably picking up on, Tom, in the larger cultural zeitgeist. I think a lot of people are picking up on it, but they don't know how to put a thumb on it. They don't know how to define it. It's that sense that things are in tumult, that we are like Hamlet, walking into a room and muttering to ourselves because we don't know which way to go. For leaders, I think obviously we should read Shakespeare. Obviously, I believe that. I believe that you should go back to the root and figure out what is happening there at the root. But also, I think you should really understand the nature of all of these kinds of cultural admonitions that are being made in this play, because they're actually human admonitions. So Hamlet performed in Beijing is the same as Hamlet performed in Nigeria, which is the same as Hamlet performed in Rio de Janeiro, and it's the same as Hamlet performed in Tokyo. These are human things, right? And the more closer we can get to our own humanity through Shakespeare, the better it will be for leaders. Tom, you got anything to say before we sign off? Any way to round this off?
No, I think not really. I mean, I almost always have something to say, as you probably already know. No, but I think we cover a lot. I coming into this, I was like every other
as usual
you and I have done. I'm like, what the hell does this have to do with leadership? But we always figure out a way, right? And we always figure out a way to interpret something in there. So I think it was pretty cool. I was a little impressed with you on this episode there, Hassan. So
well, and we were kind of flying blind a little bit. This so you all know, this is a little inside baseball. I didn't write a script for this episode today. That's just
so if you hated this episode, it was because we were just winging it.
We were just winging it. We winged the whole thing.
If you loved it, it's because we were winging it.
That's right. And with that, that's it for us. We're out. Listen and subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on all the major podcast players that you listen to podcasts on, including iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and even Spotify. And please leave a 5-star review if you like the show. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to make sure that this show gets into the ears of the leaders who need to hear it. And of course, tell all your friends. If you want to get started on the leadership path, HSCT Publishing's products and services can help your team do that. Check out our training webinars, coaching services, and more at leadershiptoolbox.us. We also have a video-based subscription service, that's software as a service, that can help your team become better at the individual level. 60 modules and over 100 hours of video and written content for you at leadingkeys.com. That's leadingkeys.com. We've also got books that will help you and your team grow. Pick up a copy today of My Boss Doesn't Care, 100 Essays on Disrupting Your Workplace by Disrupting Your Boss, and subscribe to the Little Red podcast I launched earlier this year with the same name as that Little Red book. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership, co-written with contributions from Bradley Madigan. This is the book for right now that was written for leaders right now. Pick up a copy by heading over to 12rulesleadersbook.com/now. That's 12rulesleadersbook.com/now. You pay for shipping, and you'll get a copy of my second book as well. Finally, you can get all these books in paperback, hardcover, or as ebooks on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place online you order books. Finally, HSCT Publishing is on YouTube. Like and subscribe to the video version of the Leadership Lessons for the Great Books podcast on the HSCT Publishing channel on YouTube. Just search for HSCT Publishing and hit the subscribe button. You'll get our weekly video updates, which is the video version of this podcast. And of course, you're going to want to subscribe to my other podcast. That's right, I do more than one. The Hasan Sorrells Presents audio experience, where I talk more casually with a broader range of people about all matters that matter in the world today, from arts all the way to analytics. All right, that's it for me.